All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to our Primer podcast. We are jumping right in. Last week, we went a little bit long. My apologies. And so this week, we're going to start kind of right in it, in the belly of the fish, so to speak. So we're in this series on Jonah that we're calling Big Fish, and we're wrestling with the implications of Jonah's journey for our own faith journeys. So let's jump in. We're in chapter 2. We're the last verse of chapter 1 into chapter 2. So Jessica, will you read for us chapter 2 or chapter 1 verse 17 and into chapter 2 verse 1?
Yeah, so I'm going to read from the Message, which is going to be on my phone.
Awesome.
Then God assigned a huge fish to swallow Jonah. Jonah was in the fish's belly 3 days and nights.
Okay. So when have you traditionally understood the fish to have swallowed Jonah? So to recap, Jonah has just been cast overboard. The seas have been calmed. He's in the water. The next verse we read is that Jonah's been swallowed by this fish. So when do you typically picture Jonah swallowed by the fish, and why?
Well, I mean, and I would have assumed, like, until I read a little further and a little more deeper,
right?
Immediately, right. Like he gets pushed into the ocean, and within 5 foot of sinking,
right?
He's already, like, the fish was right there to swallow him up.
Yeah,
and so that's been my thought in the past.
Yeah, I think it's the same with me, right? That's how I've always read this passage. Is Jonah hits the water, there's a fish waiting for him, swallows him up. And I've realized a lot of that is because of this framework in my mind that has been a scientific framework. You know, we talked about this a little bit in week 1, but we're trying to make sure that this story makes sense for us scientifically. That, like, okay, so why does he have to be swallowed by the fish relatively quickly? Because human beings can't breathe underwater, right? And so in our minds, it's like, well, of course he's swallowed by the fish immediately so he can breathe. But the point we made in the first one is this is clearly a miracle, no matter what, no matter how you think about it. It's a miraculous, moment of salvation, and the very definition of a miracle is that you can't explain it from scientific terms, right? And so sure, we can talk about there have been sailors swallowed by a fish and these kind of things, and that's interesting and very cool. But it doesn't have a whole lot of relevance on what happens with Jonah. And so when you free yourself from that and say, okay, we don't have to view this from a scientific methodology, suddenly I think something beautiful opens up, and we're going to see that in his prayer. So can you read Jonah's prayer there that just continues on in chapter 2? So he's in the belly of the whale, and this is his response to what happens. And specifically thinking about this prayer is talking about what has just happened to him that has led him to the belly of the whale here.
Yeah. Then Jonah prayed to his God from the belly of the fish. He prayed, "In trouble, deep trouble, I prayed to God. He answered me. From the belly of the grave, I cried, help. You heard my cry. You threw me into the ocean's depths, into a watery grave. With ocean waves, ocean breakers crashing over me, I said, I've been thrown away, thrown out of your sight. I'll never again lay eyes on your holy temple. Ocean gripped me by the throat. The ancient abyss grabbed me and held me tight. My head was all tangled in seaweed at the bottom of the sea, where the mountains take root. I was as far down as a body can go, and the gates were slamming shut behind me forever."
Okay, let's pause there, and we'll hold that point to continue. What are details that Jonah has just shared that seem curious or interesting or don't fit this common narrative that we've had that the fish swallowed me immediately?
That his head was tangled in seaweed.
Okay.
He's at the bottom of the sea where the mountains take root.
Right. So let me pause you there, because that's really an interesting detail. So again, we picture everything through our understanding of the world, right? And we understand that the world is a globe, and that there are land masses and oceans and these kind of things. But in the ancient world, basically they understood that the land essentially sat like an island, one landmass like an island on top of the water, and was anchored into the abyss by these pillars that descended down through the waters. And it was at the base of those pillars that the concept of Sheol, the netherworld, and it says in that the belly of the netherworld, right? The depths of the grave. And how was that defined? By the gates of Sheol that would bar you in. So like Jonah's saying something here that he perceives himself to have sunk all the way to the depths of the sea, where he is now entering into the netherworld, the place that he cannot return from, right? And so there's this kind of powerful illustration here where Jonah's recognizing that he has basically gotten the very thing he wanted, to escape God.
Mm-hmm.
And
he thinks he's dying.
Right. He thinks he's dying. He is dying. And he has escaped God. The whole reason he was trying to go to Tarshish was not because, hey, I love Tarshish, it's a great place to, set up roots. It was like that was as far as he thought he could run from God. And now he's literally gotten as far as he can get from God in the moments before his death, where he'll be bound by this netherworld in Sheol. And in that moment, something's going to happen. So let's finish that prayer there.
Yet you pulled me up from the grave alive. O God, my God, when my life was slipping away, I remembered God, and my prayer got through to you, made it all the way to your holy temple. Those who worship hollow gods, God frauds, walk away from their only true love. But I am worshiping you, God, calling out in thanksgiving, and I'll do what I'm promised I'll do. Salvation belongs to God.
Yeah. So what's his turning point there, that he goes from this watery grave? What's the turning point for Jonah?
When he remembered.
Right.
When he remembered God to be the loving God that he is.
Right. There's this beauty here that he has reached the furthest point of his will, his desire, his flight. And then in that moment, he remembers God. And what does it say happens when he remembers God?
My prayer got through to you.
Right. In the verse before that.
Before that, when
he lifts him from the pit. Right?
Yeah, he pulled me up from that grave alive.
Right. So there's this picture where now he remembers, and in the moment of remembering God's way, remembering God's will, a moment of turning back towards God, God is going to work in this remarkably miraculous way to save him from this watery grave, and in a way that Jonah can't possibly imagine, because there's this beauty that Jonah is if he's in the very bottom of the sea, he is helpless to do anything about that, right? His life's over. Mm-hmm. There's nothing he can do. And yet he remembers God in these dying moments as his life, it says, is slipping away. Another translation says his soul is slipping away, which fits within an ancient context of how they understood death, that your soul was the final thing to leave your body. And so he has this turning point, and God's going to send a miracle, right? And that miracle comes in the form of a fish.
One thing that is, I'm thinking while I'm thinking of looking at this, the verse where God saved Jonah is before he remembered, right? So like he says, yet you pulled me up from the grave alive, and I remembered God. So it's less about what Jonah's doing and remembering, and more about what God's doing. I think Jonah.
At least the focus is more on what God is doing for Jonah, is that Jonah is completely helpless to anything. I think Jonah is kind of doing some repetitive language, because he then says, the moment before my soul slips away, I remembered you. But yeah, the focus is definitely on that. It reminds me of the story of the prodigal son. Do you have Luke chapter 15, 11 through 20? Why don't you just read that portion, and then as you're at home, or Jessica, reflect on where do you see the parallels between this story of God's love and then the story of God's salvation in Jonah.
Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to the citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and he went to his father."
Yeah. So where do you see the parallels between that story and what we've seen take place over the story of Jonah so far?
I think the leaving, I think the feeling of wanting more, like the son felt like he deserved more. Or
it's not only leaving, it's perceiving that I know better how to deal with your resources.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So there's that.
And then the remembering what he had.
Yeah.
Remembering that even though, because how quickly he squandered away the wealth, and he immediately remembered even the servants that his father had were taken care of better than he was.
Yeah, so it's reaching this point where we get to the end of the rope of our way and our will, and we're suddenly like, oh man, this is not at all what I expected it to be and thought it would be. And then remembering the goodness and the love of God, and maybe not even, the prodigal son doesn't feel like he deserves to be a son again.
Right.
And it's only through the work of this good father that he restores him as one of his children. And I think there's this beauty there that is happening in Jonah as well, is that this is a story of somebody that has reached the end of the rope of what they thought they wanted, and they've realized, oh no, this wasn't what I wanted. This isn't what I wanted. And there's this smallest thing of turning back, and then God meets them in this remarkably, overwhelmingly unconditional, loving way and saves them from the grave. And I think the beauty here is that, a lot is made about the miracle of the fish. And it is a stunning miracle. And yet we experience that same miracle every day in our own lives. Like, far more miraculous than a fish entering into the sea is a God entering into the brokenness of this world, entering into our hurt, our shame, our sin, entering into our stubborn pursuit of wealth and power and significance and happiness and all of these different things, and receiving us and lifting us from that brokenness and restoring us as his children. And there's beauty there. And I think we take that for granted so often, that God is there waiting to receive us. God is actively pursuing. God is entering this world in a miraculous way, in the same way that God entered into the world and entered into the depths of the sea with the fish to save Jonah, where even that moment where we recognize, wow, maybe my way wasn't the way.
Right.
God is there to receive us. And that's going to have powerful implications for Jonah in Nineveh, in the same way it's going to have powerful implications for us, is that when we've been rescued from that place, then it leads us into a way of participating with God. But I think there's just a lot of beauty in that passage. So
Yeah, it's definitely made me think differently in the way that I've read Jonah. And, I definitely feel like the miraculous thought of the fish and Jonah being able to, survive in the fish. But that is not what the story is about. It's
Yeah.
about the love of God and the pursuit of
Yeah.
of of the way that God continues to pursue Jonah.
Yeah.
I see that in the sense of like, and how he cares for Jonah through
Yeah.
all of this. And so like it's definitely made me dig a little deeper into to each word and each verse of
Well, and it adds this beauty of free will too, where it's not God forcing Jonah to go to Nineveh, right? Like if the fish swallows him the second he hits Jonah's got no voice in this at all, but instead it's this picture of God allowing Jonah to have the very thing he wants, to be as far separated from, but the moment that Jonah turns even a little bit, God's like, but I'm here, and I'll carry you out of this, and I'll provide a way, even when there does not seem to be any way possible. And so there's this beauty there where it's not just God forcing Jonah's hand, it's Jonah coming to this realization in the depths of despair that I was wrong, and that's all God needs to then miraculously enter in. So I hope that's a helpful thought to be wrestling with in your personal devotion, in your groups, and we can't wait to see you soon.
See you next week.